Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 34 of the Electric B2B show. And this will be one of my most favorite episodes, or my more favorite episodes so far, if there's such a comparison. but yeah, this is a special episode for the only reason that, we've been doing client work and we've been doing this podcast, and we've been really deeply entrenched in demand gen and B2B marketing for about a year and a half now as a company, and of course a lot longer as individuals. And over this past about 18 to 20 months, a lot has we've seen models come and go, we've seen concepts come and go, we saw good practice, we saw bad practices, we had experiments that worked, we had experiments that didn't work, and there were a bunch of things that we learned from. But then a couple of weeks ago, I went on vacation because I had a baby daughter who was born. And during this time, I didn't work too much, but your mind doesn't stop spinning. So what happened was that all the things that we've been doing over the past 18 months have started to settle. And frankly, I had this big problem, it's not a big problem. I mean, the war in Ukraine is a big problem. This isn't a big problem. But my concern was that even though we're working with clients, and they're having good success. So just the other day, we talked to somebody with whom we're hitting the 12-month mark and they're getting results. Everybody's super happy, but still, and this is a very intelligent CEO, still, they have a lot of things mixed up, and still they tend to lose direction in what we're doing. And still there are blind spots and things that just, don't fall into place. And for him, and obviously everybody else is that. I mean, a lot of other people are that way as well. So what we thought with Zori was that, hey, we ought to come up with a model that makes better sense of everything that we do. Okay. And really this whole, even the concepts around B2B growth are confusing. So you have growth, you have going to market, you have demand generation, you have lead generation. And I'm not going to go into definitions, don't worry. This is not one of those shows. But all these concepts, they mean quite similar things. And when you are a sales leader or a company leader who wants to amp up growth, and you start reading about this stuff and you start talking to people, you get confused very fast. So again, we created this model, not for everybody. So this isn't like a globally applicable model, but we think that it's the perfect model, or it's on the way to being the perfect model for companies who are in the sweet spot of what we call the GTM wedge. Okay. And let me just explain this diagram a little bit. Okay. So this system, this coordinate system, has two axes. On the y-axis, you have market maturity. Okay, and here you've got very mature markets such as, clay building blocks, or to be in, more specifically in the technological segment, let's say CRM software. Okay, CRM software has been around since the 80s, so it's quite a mature market. Here on the bottom, you have young markets, which are not really mature. So this is these are the most innovative categories which haven't existed a couple of years ago. And artificial intelligence would be somewhere in the middle here. Okay, so here you've got market maturity, and here what you have is the uniqueness of your product or solution. And they tend to go hand in hand a lot of times. It's not a one-to-one correlation, but in a mature market such as CRM software, you usually have big players, and then you have a couple of niche players, smaller players with niche solutions. But in general, you can say that the more mature the market is, the more generic solutions there are. And again, this isn't a perfect representation of how these markets work, but for our purposes right now to understand this model, it's good. And so what we've got here for the GTM wedge, this method, is that, okay, it works in pretty much any B2B scenario and circumstance, but where it's really effective is somewhere in the middle here. And by somewhere in the middle, what I mean is that you've got to be post-product market fit, and you've got to have somewhat of an innovative solution and not a really generic solution, because it just works better with innovative solutions, but not these completely inexplicable solutions or products or services where like even getting the customer to understand what the heck you're talking about and what the heck you're doing is a challenge. So it's not for like those super innovative markets. It's for, fairly innovative services. And ideally, you'll want to be post-revenue. So ideally, your company is already making money, perhaps even a profit. If you're a venture-funded company, you might not be making a profit, but for service companies, you're almost certainly making a profit by the time you're here. And so this is the sweet spot. It probably doesn't work. This model probably isn't that applicable in like a huge enterprise setting or on the other end of the spectrum, which would be like a 5-person startup with 0 resources. Okay. And the reason for that is because you do need some resources for this. Okay. So you need manpower, you need some money for advertising, for software, but not a huge budget. Okay. So again, the GTM Wedge is, I'm not going to say it's a game changer like in general, but it's really a game changer for marketing teams and revenue teams who do this kind of stuff. Because what it does is that it evens out all the confusion and makes everything that you do in marketing a lot more trackable, a lot more followable, a lot more plannable, and just plainly easier to understand. So what I said that a big challenge with us and the clients was that, or has been that it's kind of hard to keep clients on track. And even after having done this thing for years, because it's so complex and it has so many layers to it, they tend to get lost, and that's not a good thing. Okay. So this will bring clarity to the game. And I'm going to skip this slide and come back to it for a second because I want to talk about clarity. This is one of my favorite business books and life books of all time. It's called Essentialism. And I've read it like 3 times in my native language, Hungarian. I've read it in English as well. And it's just an awesome book. And I love the cover. So the cover of this book has stuck with me forever. It says, going from this to this, where things get untangled and they tend to, and they start to make sense. So that's how I think of this model, that the GTM Wedge is basically GTM Essentialism. Okay. And it's a great book. And this previous slide that I just skipped over was that, we're not pretending that we just walked in here and we have like a completely new method and we just pulled it out of our asses and nothing's existed before us and we figured it all out. No, the GTM Wedge is mostly the compilation of existing frameworks and existing methods from relatively distant fields in business and marketing. And it's bringing these methods together, weeding out what's essential and what's important for these companies that I've talked about, for whom it's ideal. So like these mid-market, medium resource, B2B technology companies. Okay. So it's taking the best of, Sangram Varya's new book, Move. You might have heard of this. It's an excellent book. It's on go-to-market. It's for a different world than what we're talking about, than what our ideal audience is. We take a whole bunch of things from Full Funnel's 6-week ABM framework, which in itself is a fabulous set of tools, which we use regularly on a day-to-day basis with clients. Highly recommended. Of course, there's the book from Latne Conant. She's leading up marketing for 6 Sense, which is an ABM platform. And she's got this quite good book on how to run ABM basically in this day and age. And of course, we're clear and we're doing a bunch of work with clients and, talking to prospects. And we're taking the learnings from these projects as well as from the Electric B2B show, which is what you're watching or listening to right now. And this, arms us with new knowledge and experience as well. So why don't we do a quick overview of what the GTM Wedge is right here. I told you it's going to be simple. And we're going to try to keep this really as simple down the line as possible. But here's the idea. We have divided everything that goes into growth, revenue marketing, and going to market into 4 components, 4 areas, basically. And you have to start at the bottom left-hand corner. First, you have to start getting things about the market right, which is the ideal customer profile and the market things. Then you might have heard the phrase market message fit, which is after you have product market fit, you need a market message fit, meaning you have to figure out the words and phrases and everything else that makes sense for your ideal customer profile. And you have to nail the messaging. Again, messaging encompasses a bit more. We're going to get into that later. But once you nail the market and once you nail the message, you can start thinking about creating what we like to call marketing assets. Others refer to this as content, but content is starting to be too narrow of a term for what we mean by marketing assets. Okay, simply put, we like to think of everything that we produce in marketing, such as this podcast recording, for example, as assets, because just like in an investment, assets are something that you have, you create, and then ideally they don't vanish. They stay with you and they become more valuable and they keep bringing you returns. They keep making you money. Okay. So once you have market and message, you can go in and start creating or refining your assets. Okay. And once you have these three, you still don't have a wedge because you don't have the top yet. You don't have the action part. And that's, by the way, a lot of marketing teams stop here. So, they do a bit of market research, they've got data, they do copywriting, they do a website, and then they just leave everything else to sales, which is, it's one way of doing things. But we prefer to take marketing in a full funnel approach, meaning we go in throughout the entire pipeline. So this means that we take action. So we do outreach, we do activation, we do nurturing, we do lead capture, and we do everything else. And that's how you will have a wedge shape. I know it looks like a triangle, but we're calling it a wedge. Because why are we calling it a wedge? Because a wedge is a small, very simple tool, a triangular tool, and you start hitting it into a big ass piece of wood, and it'll take this big, humongous and strong piece of wood. And if you just hammer the wedge in, it'll split it. So I think it's an awesome metaphor for what we're doing when we're trying to enter competitive markets as underdogs and really start kicking ass. Zoli, I see that you have settled. Zoli's my colleague, by the way, the guy in the Coke t-shirt. Do you want to add something to this overview and summary of the GTM Wedge?
Hey everyone, no, not so far. I just had the time to settle down. Got back to my station, I would say, in the garden. But yeah, not so far. Nothing to add so far.
Okay, well, in that case, good. Let me know if you have questions or if this makes sense so far. You can just type in the chat, like hit a plus if this makes sense so far, and hit a minus if it doesn't. But my assumption is that it's going to make a lot more sense as we start getting into each and every one of these. Okay. I see that it makes sense for Zoli, which is good news. All right. So Zoli, you want to take this first one, which is the market?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, as Dan was just saying, the basic two pillars of this whole thing is going to be market and message. And I think you already said this, but I was just settling up, in. So let me know if I'm just repeating everything you're saying, but you just clicked away. So yeah,
I just clicked away.
The basic two pillars, market and message, will both have to do with something similar, but one is going to be who you are talking to, and then the message will be, what you're saying to those people. So, it struck sort of the same chord, but one is like the basis of that. So one will be market, will be the ICP, the ideal customer profile, informational needs of the people you are talking to, and any sort of insight you can get on the target audience. So that will be anything that has to do with, just targeting, just laser focusing on who is it that I want to be talking to. And this is something that is like, there is a reason why this is one of the key pillars, one of the founding pillars of the whole wedge or the whole triangle, is because, unless you have a really clear understanding of who is it that you're talking to, what sort of targets you are trying to reach with your message, you will have a hard time with, hitting the nail in the head, because your message will be vague. Your message will, just get diluted in the abyss.
Yeah. Perfect. Yeah. So the key takeaway is, in everything under market, what's our ideal target customer and what are they looking for? Okay. And I'm going to show you an example of how we map the information needs of the customers. And there is also a research component to this pillar of the wedge, which is insight, because ideally, whenever you're going to market and you're doing any sort of marketing, you want to start with research because you always want to talk to customers and there's always something new to be asked from customers. And as you're going to see, we have insight and customer research in another stage as well, which is the next one, which is message, especially if my slide thingy clicks. Okay.
Before we move on, let me just quickly add something to this. Sorry, I just meant to say that, the stuff that we are saying right now, it may sound like super trivial. So this is something that, you hear everywhere. Oh, really? I have to, nail down my target audience. Well, who would have thought? But I think what's important here is to know that, just because you know who you're talking to, as Dan said at the beginning, even after working together with someone, for 8 months, whatever, they can still have the feeling that, am I not missing out on some of the audience? Am I not, missing out on some of the targets? And when you're setting up your ICP, when you're trying to understand what are the informational needs of your ICP, especially, in a B2B setup, you're talking to multiple people in a company. So it's not just going to be, oh, I drew up this, fake persona of the perfect customer that I have, but it's specifically going to be different roles, people who are interested in you and will bring your idea or bring your solution into the company, people who will, be in favor of it. And then there will be people in the company likely who will say, you know what, I'm not sure about this. Are we sure that we want to be spending money on this and whatever? And when you're trying to set this up, you have to make sure that you're really filtering down and you're just focusing on the targets or the audience that will, react favorably, and that will the sort of audience that you can test out quickly. So just because someone might be good down the line in a few years for you, or even in 6 months, you're going to want to disqualify them right now because they are not the right fit for you at this moment.
Yeah, especially so as you're setting this up, what we like to do is go really narrow and test things out on a well-defined and small and highly ideal customer sub-segment. Okay. And then you can expand later, obviously, into other niches and other segments. So you can widen your scope. But initially we like to go really narrow. Okay. Now the second component is all about what you tell the market. And notice that we're not rushing into creating content yet, okay, as many marketing teams do, okay? So a lot of times, people start by, okay, who's our customer? They typically don't go deep enough. They're like, okay, let's say manufacturing companies above a certain size in North America, which is super wide. It's super, super broad, okay? And then they're like, okay, well, what sort of content would they be wanting to read? And then they go into asset creation. But we're like, no. Okay, let's figure out our positioning first. If you did your homework here in the market segment and you have a clearly defined ideal customer profile, then you're going to have an easier time working out a unique positioning and a unique point of view. Do you want to define positioning in 3 sentences? I don't think we want to go super deep into it, but there is a structure that we use. It's from April Dunford, whose book we didn't even put out on the screen previously. But it's another system that we have adapted to our purposes and our needs here. It's a 5-step process. No, it's a 10-step process, right, Zoli?
There's 5 components to what April is saying. And then, the steps is in however many steps you can do it, but it's, usually between 5 to 10 steps. But yeah, I meant to say actually before earlier, but I was still on my way, that, April Dunford is one of the people that I think we often refer to, and then we forgot to put her book up about positioning. But yeah, so really basically positioning is basically the foundation upon which the house, which will be marketing and sales, is built. Or as April puts it, how your product is the best in the world at providing some value that a well-defined set of customers care about. So what she's saying right there is that, again, really it's what I said before. When you're setting up your positioning, what you want to be sure about is that you're focusing on the right now. So it's not that, what am I trying to say about myself for the next 10 years? It's who am I providing value to, a specific, really filtered down audience am I providing value to, and what is the benefit that I'm providing to them? Why am I, most valuable to them right now? Mm-hmm. And this is something that obviously just with the ICP as well, and just with anything else, the informational needs and the insight, you will want to revisit, I would say every 6 months likely, and then, from 6 months to a year. But you definitely want to revisit this idea and just see how has this shifted, how has my ICP shifted, and am I able to, broaden my positioning or maybe shift my positioning to some way or another.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. So that's positioning. The other thing that you've got to get really clear on are your core messages. And you don't just have to be clear. You have to make sure that it's used consistently across the organization, because what tends to happen is that marketing people figure out some sort of messages and arguments and value props, and then sales uses something totally different that they're used to. Customer success tends to speak the language of the customer, so they use something that is, again, different. So any company will have at least 3 variations of a thought or a message floating around out there. They might have a 4th variation in some old piece of marketing collateral that's also out there, either the website or in print. And so messaging just becomes a mess. And we like to add the edging to the mess. Oh my God, that's horrible. This is very spontaneous.
The aging to the mess, yeah.
Messaging becomes a mess. So you have to add ages there.
Yeah.
Okay, this is terrible. So I'm going to switch topics. I'm going to move on to the brand narrative. And what's a brand narrative? A brand narrative is built on your unique point of view. And it's basically the story of how you guide your customers to their ideal future state, to their ideal goal, their ideal destination. Okay, so the brand narrative isn't a story about your company. It isn't the narrative of the awesomeness of your product or service or solution. It is a story about how your customer, your buyer, who is the hero, wins the day with your help in the background. So in this narrative, you're always the coach, you're the guide. And if you're familiar with the story brand framework, this is very close to that. So this is, again, an adapted version. In fact, I'm going to show you just how this looks in practice. I'm going to just skip ahead. Here's the brand script for one of our clients. It's basically taking these 7 stages, which is identifying the hero, who's your ideal buyer, identifying their problem, defining the guide, who is basically you, and they show up with empathy, and you have to figure out why you are the ideal or the perfect guide. And the guide always has a plan, and the guide calls the hero to action, which is basically all the go-to-market actions and marketing that we do. And then you have to paint a gloomy state. So like, what happens? Part of your narrative has to include what happens if your hero doesn't take action. Okay, so just like in a movie or a story, there's always a very heavy consequence to the hero not taking action and not stepping up to the challenge or choosing the wrong path. And you have to make that clear in your narrative. But what you have to make even more clear and even tastier is what happens if they do decide to go with you. Okay, so like, that's the happy end, right? And so again, this is like one of the subsystems that we use in the GTM Wedge. And yeah, it just makes everything clear, I think. Okay, so that was the brand narrative and that was the messaging. And so the third component, the center of the wedge, are the assets, which is, which people like to simplify as content, but it's not just content, because there are at least 2 other pieces to the puzzle here. One is community, which I think if you're entering a competitive market in the 21st century in B2B, sooner or later, you're going to have to start strategically building people who like you and organizing them into some sort of thing, which we call a community. If you don't, there's a high likelihood that someone else will. So we used to say like community is sort of an optional thing. And it's definitely not something that you want to start with when you've got other problems such as product market fit. But it is a path. Even so, it's possible to start with community very early, because you've seen a bunch of examples with companies who have started as communities and have evolved and started creating products. So I just contradicted what I said earlier, by the way, right there. So you can't even start with community. If you're a growing company, you're scaling, you don't have a community, I'm not saying just throw away everything and start building a community, because that might not be the way, but it has to be a central piece of the puzzle 18 months down the line for, I think, everybody.
Yeah.
Because there's huge, so it's very hard to compete with community. You can enter a market with your product and be number 27, and you can still make a good living, and you can have an idea. If the demand is there, you can be company number 27 and still make healthy money. But if you miss the boat on community and your competitor starts building something significant, it's a lot harder to be number 2 or number 3 in that aspect. And a community just has so much power, and it's such an important asset. It cannot be copied. It cannot be duplicated. Anything about your product or service can be copied, like anything, everything. Like your best people can leave, go start working for a competitor, and they can replicate what you just did for years and years and years and what you researched. The only thing that they can't take away or steal is your community. Okay. Even intellectual property that can be stolen and taken away and copied or whatever. Community cannot.
Yeah. What I wanted to quickly add to that is that, community, I think, is something that is often put aside because you feel like with, all of this, and I don't mean to sound like a parrot, but, just to reiterate, when we say that, market and message are the 2 key pillars, and you want to, have that settled or make sure that you have that nailed before you start, producing content and all of that. I think that also is the same logic that you see with creating product and the logic of like the minimum value product and RAT and everything with regards to that, is that before you spend a lot of time, effort, and whatever into creating something that you think that is right, whether that's a product or content or whatever, you want to make sure that you actually have some data and you have some feedback from the people that you're trying to create for or, trying to sell your solution to. And I think one of the great things about community, and why I think it's an issue that often it's put aside and people will be much more happy to, spend money on like PPC, any sort of performance marketing, because they think, okay, if I just, get this right in front of the people that I want to get in front of, then I'm going to be, ace. But then with community, the great thing about it is that you get a really quick and useful feedback loop. So, if you're messing up something, if you're not getting something right, when you have a community in place who is interested in and, to some extent actually invested in what you're creating, because they were there from whatever day one, from the beginning, they will give you feedback and they will give you crap. And when you're asking, your friends, your family of your friends, whatever, am I doing the right thing? Most often they will say, oh yeah, it sounds great, whatever, what you're putting out. I think that's cool, because, they want to say that, and then they, they don't want to bring you down. But if you have a community of people who is to some extent invested in what you're putting out there, but are still just strangers, they will tell you that you're going the wrong way.
And in fact, so I just realized that the reason I'm such a big fan of community is because in my previous business, we actually built a community, and there's somebody on this call from that community who I know through that community, and he was a part of that community, Peter. And that's the power of it. So he was in that community. It was a totally different market than where we are right now. And the relationship stayed, and it's just awesome.
And you have the age-old adage, which can again get super boring, but saying that people don't buy products, they buy people, or buy from people, whatever. But that's just, as you said right now, it just multiplicates with community, because then you actually, if you promise, or I would rather say, if convince people that what you're putting out has value, then later on, if you're putting out something completely different, as it is in this case, they will still might be interested, because they already knew you and they already knew that you took care of the details and whatever.
Exactly. Okay. There are other important components here. I didn't mean to talk about community so much because it's not like highly relevant for most people on this call, probably, but it's just so top of mind for me. And what I'm seeing is, it's amazingly, freakishly effective. So I try to look for some research on how much a company's valuation is raised when they have a substantial community behind them. And I try to look for a multiplier, but Because I heard stuff from, from anything from 3x to 9x, and I just wanted to get some like credible numbers. I wasn't able to, but nevertheless, so it's such a huge multiplier even for your company value. Okay.
Yeah, and by the way, the same goes for content, I think. So, if you don't want to be focusing on community, the same goes for content. So the more content you're putting out, the more you are just showing to the world, basically, or showing to your audience, probably the quicker you will have some sort of feedback on it, and the quicker you will be able to decide what is it that should stay and what is it that you might want to be changing around. So even without a community, if you just focus on content, it's always better to be how is it better to be done than finished, or is it the other way around?
Better done than perfect.
Or done than perfect, yeah.
Okay. Another thing in content, we used to say you don't necessarily need to do webinars and podcasts. It's advisable. We said that like half a year ago, even half a year ago. Now, I don't know what your opinion is, Zoe, but I think if you're in a competitive market, so unless you're like selling cold beer in the Sahara Desert in the summer, in which case you don't really need marketing. But if you're in a competitive market, B2B, I see no reason why you shouldn't start a podcast. And on the other side, I see like 27 reasons why you should. A podcast or video production or webinar series, what we're doing right now, I mean, it's just such an awesome source of content. We get community feedback. We get everything. It's great. It's great.
I would just add to that, as you said, whatever sort of video content that is, it is definitely worth producing. For one reason, it brings you closer to your audience, so they will actually be able to put a face to what you're trying to provide them or sell to them, and then it just it's such an awesome sort of media to get in touch.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so guys, don't forget that whatever we're talking about here, like these items that you see, they are concepts here in the demand wedge, and we can talk about them. But in actuality, when we're working, these are actually, they each represent a system or a process. And for example, for content, we have a content creation mechanism, which is based on producing videos like this and then repurposing it and then distributing that content, after having repurposed it into several formats. And so behind everything here, there is a mechanism or a system, which we're not going to get into right now. It's just for you to understand that, this helps companies navigate go-to-market. And again, the way that these things build up on each other, I think is beautiful. Okay. So again, we're not just creating content by pulling ideas out of our butts, or a community for community's sake, or even intelligence, which we haven't gotten to. This is all based on the ideal customer profile and their informational needs that helps them drive the decision-making within their companies in the buying committee. It's based on insight from qualitative and quantitative insight from the target market. That's one of the pillars that the content sits on. And the other pillar is the positioning and the core messages, which we want to reiterate and repeat and embed and engrave. I ran out of synonyms, Zoe, but it's the messaging that we constantly want to be repeating because it's our unique point of view, and it's our strengths, and it's our value propositions. And of course, all of this, the messaging and positioning and the narrative, again, it's all built on the ideal customer profile, okay? And then you have content sitting in on top of these two things. So they're like hugging, they're so interrelated, okay? And the third item here is intelligence/insight. And this is about a data strategy, okay? What kind of data should you be using as a B2B company? Third-party data is going out of fashion. And third-party data is basically data that you have from cookies. And it's data that you are, basically collecting through cookies or getting from third-party data providers, such as ZoomInfo, for example, or Apollo or Lucia. These are companies from whom you can buy data, be it profile enrichment, like, a target person's phone number or whatever, their position, company information. If you're in B2B, you probably know that there are a bunch of sources where you can purchase data. Now, because of growing privacy concerns and strictness, as I said, third-party data is really going out of fashion. Okay. Now, first-party data is basically data that you collect on the website without or any media properties that you own, without the people necessarily being conscious that you are collecting data about them. The easiest example for this is, website traffic on your own website. So you have Google Analytics or some other attribution tool installed, and you are tracking the behavior of the user. Of course, now they have to consent, but it's still considered first-party data because it's happening on your website. It's like on your website. Okay. Now, there is this thing called zero-party data, which I think is the most exciting. And it is customers willingly and knowingly giving you quantitative and qualitative information about their organizations, about their purchasing habits, about whatever you ask them. Okay. And the easiest way to get zero-party data is to pick up the phone and talk to a customer. Okay. So when you are talking to a customer and you're formally creating intelligence out of that, that's referred to as zero-party data. Now, there's another way to collect zero-party data, which is through surveys and quizzes and forums, wherever people give you data about themselves willingly. And it's becoming a huge part of our strategy. In fact, you might have come across this quiz, which is, or it's an assessment basically that helps you assess your state of your GTM strategy and where you are in the process. It's connected to the GTM Wedge. You might have seen this quiz. Now, that's a form, again, of zero-party data because you're telling us what you're doing, where you are in the process, what's going on in your company. And it's just massively, hugely valuable. Now, the situation in the marketplace is that companies have been getting so used to getting third-party data cheaply that they're a little bit lazy on getting first-party and zero-party data. Okay, so data can be bought relatively cheaply, even now, even today, from ZoomInfo and whatever service providers. Up to a couple of years ago, you could target users freakishly effectively, even on Facebook. So you could have been doing account-based targeting on Facebook because you could have targeted people who work at specific companies on Facebook for pennies. Okay, now that's gone. Facebook targeting is gone. Facebook targeting that is that effective, that's gone. And so the world is forcing advertisers and marketers to move towards first party and zero party data. Okay. And that's why we have mechanisms such as creating assessments and then creating marketing plays out of that. Okay. We spent a lot of time here. We've still got a couple of minutes in this call. Let's look at the last piece of the puzzle, Zori. This is action, which has 4 components.
Yeah. So this is basically the execution of everything that we have been talking about. And as you said before, all of these parts, all of these elements that we have mentioned and, the details in them will, most all of them refer to some sort of strategy. So, everything will have like a more elaborate strategy behind it. But this part does as well. Also, although this is execution, so this is about using everything that you have built up, the content that you have built up based on the ICP and the positioning that you have right now. And this is the part where you actually execute. So you start warming up the people that you want to talk to, your target audience. And then, once you have all of this will likely run in either one another in a cadence, or some of them you can run synchronously at the same time. So you can have your warm-up campaigns, but at the same time, if someone you feel it more down the funnel, then you can start your activation campaigns. And then nurturement will be, something that you want to be doing continuously. So although usually when you say nurture, I think one of the quickest thing that your mind goes to is like, oh, nurture emails. So I'm going to, send out a few nurture email sequences. But that's actually not what we mean by nurture. What we mean is you constantly want to be talking to your target audience. You constantly want to be talking to your prospect, all down the funnel. And specifically in B2B, this is true. I think there's not a huge difference between B2B and B2C anymore. But in B2B, where you're likely selling, high ACV products or services, you definitely want to continuously talk to the targets that are in your, whatever funnel in your Salesforce or whatever, because, just a few warm-up rounds and then an activation and then, trying to capture them, it might work out sometimes, but often they will have a lot more chaotic cadence of moving up and down the funnel. So you continuously want to be talking to them. And basically what you do with execution is everything that you're so far built up. And this is why at the beginning I said most of what we're saying is likely something that you already know about. You've already heard about ICP, you already heard about, getting intelligence or data on people. You know that you have to set up your core messaging and your positioning. But the reason why we drew it up this way, and as the beginning then said, is that it can still get a bit convoluted. And I think a lot of companies feel like, well, we sort of have our positioning. We sort of know what our brand is trying to say. We have at least like 3 to 4 different core messages. They might be a bit, contradictory, but whatever, at least we can, talk to more people. And they start producing content or they start putting the stuff out there. But then it's something that doesn't really drive you to the point. So you don't really know, where am I going? Okay, this, they are saying this, and then they're saying also that. So the idea is to have, an order in this. So first you want to set up the ICP, then you want to set up the positioning, then you want to start, building content on it based on what you already have. And then you want to start taking action. And this doesn't mean that you have to do, months on end of strategy, but you definitely want to have, a continuous iteration of these and then going back and then refining it and then also refining the action part.
Yeah. Let me ask you guys, everybody on this call, just put it in the chat, like a one-word answer. Where do you feel your organization is the strongest in these areas? Is it market, message, assets, or action? And just to be clear, most companies don't have everything down perfectly. I don't know of any company that has everything down perfectly. So it's perfectly possible that, you have a company making good money who is creating almost no content, but is very strong in sales.
Yeah. I think that's something that we most often see is that they're good with direct
lead gen,
sales.
so they're pretty weak here. Depending on the market, so many companies, like even good companies, like famous companies, quote unquote, they don't have a very strong positioning or a narrative. You'll see that, like, Salesforce used to have an awesome positioning, but do they any longer? Like when they said, okay, screw on-premise CRM systems, you got to move to the cloud. So Salesforce is cloud computing. Now, ever since that category has vanished because everybody's in the cloud now, like, do they have a competitive stance? No, not really. They don't really have positioning. I mean, I couldn't make out. Same with HubSpot. They started out with a very strong positioning statement as the small business all-in-one marketing suite. And now as that category has matured, they don't really have positioning any longer and strong core messages that I could recall. But that's okay, because if you go back to this, these companies, these markets are so mature, like for Salesforce and HubSpot, and so are the companies. They're okay without this. So that's why I said, like, this demand wedge, it's for small, but especially mid-market companies who are entering competitive markets, and they need these pillars. Okay, so let me see what you guys have answered. Peter, none. Dana, action. You think we're strongest in action, Dana? That's good. That would be a good argument to have internally. Like, where are we the strongest and where are we the weakest? Okay, Zoli, what do you think? For clear, what's our strong spot from these?
Yeah, I would say, assets and action. So those are like the two that we have nailed down. And then obviously, since we are the ones who are putting this up, we are working on all of these. But strongest points is assets and actions at this point.
Yeah, but the good news for everybody, and I'm going to tease what's going on. Very soon, we're going to have an assessment that'll help you gauge where you are with each one of these components, okay? So if you've taken our GTM assessment, that's that's the granddaughter of what we're putting together, a more comprehensive assessment that'll tell you where you are in each of these areas, and it'll help you pick, what to do next. So I'm pretty excited about that. It's already in the lab. We're working on it. We're cooking it. Yeah. Zoli, anything else to add? I did have more slides, by the way, but I just don't think we can get to them in 5 minutes in. And I think this has been like plenty. I don't know how you guys are, but I'd love to just take questions from you if you're still around and you, yeah, this is the deep dive that I don't really want to get into right now. I think we're going to have a new session on this.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Do you guys, anybody want to come online or type something in the chat if you have questions? Oh, Bullet, I see your strong point is action as well. That's good to hear. Awesome. Yeah, I think action is strong for a lot of companies. Okay, yeah, we're not going to get into that. Okay, so guys, if there are no questions, this has been great and insightful. And thank you so much for making it on this beautiful summer afternoon. Oh, you say, okay, Bullet.
That's nice.
You were referring to us that we are good at action. Actually, that's where I think we're the weakest. Like, that's my opinion in action, because there's just so much to do and so much to like work out and systemize in this area. I think that's our weak spot. But I'm so glad that you guys think that that it's not. Okay, this has been great, and I'm looking forward to talking to you guys again next week. I have no idea what we're going to talk about and who we're going to bring on, but it's going to be fun and exciting. I'm going to be checking in from Lake Balaton.
That's cool.
And yeah, hopefully. And so I'm excited to start to talk to you next week again.
Yeah, thanks a lot for coming, and we would love to see you guys in the next one.
Thanks, Bullet. Thanks, Peter. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.